Nothing special by human standards. Just a man who flew supplies between colonies and tried to make an honest living in a galaxy that did not care about one small species from one small planet. But when raiders attacked a Varanus supply convoy, Daniel Morgan had been the only captain who stayed to fight. He had bought the convoy enough time to escape. He had saved 3,000 lives. He had died doing it. The Council of 12 had been so moved by his sacrifice that they offered his orphaned daughter a place at the academy. It was meant to be an honor, a gift, a sign that humanity might one day be welcomed among the greater species of the galaxy. Katie knew better. She had seen the looks on the council members' faces when they made the announcement. They expected her to fail. They expected her to wash out within the first semester and prove that humans were not ready for the galactic stage. Her scholarship was not a gift. It was a test. The shuttle landed on a platform surrounded by students from dozens of different species. Katie grabbed her small bag of belongings and stepped out into the open air. The gravity here was stronger than Earth standard. She felt it immediately in her legs and back. Every step required more effort than it should have. A group of Valorians stood nearby, watching her with open curiosity. They were tall and thin, with silvery skin that seemed to glow in the sunlight. Each of them had 4 arms instead of 2. They moved with a grace that made Katie feel clumsy and small. One of them said something in a language she did not understand. The others laughed. Katie kept walking. The registration hall was enormous. Hundreds of students moved through it in organized lines, each one being processed by floating administrative drones. Katie found the line marked for new arrivals and took her place at the end. The student in front of her was a Kreth, a massive reptilian creature that stood nearly 3 meters tall. His scales were dark green and his eyes were yellow with vertical slits. He looked down at Katie and made a sound that might have been a growl or might have been a greeting. She could not tell. "Hello," she said. The Kreth turned away without responding. The registration process took hours. Katie was scanned, measured, tested, and questioned. The drones seemed confused by her biology. They kept asking her to repeat tests that she had already completed. Finally, a senior administrator appeared and examined her results with obvious skepticism. "You are the human," the administrator said. It was a Silithian, an insectoid being with compound eyes and mandibles that clicked when it spoke. Its voice came from a translator device around its neck. "Yes," Katie said. "Your physical scores are far below the minimum requirements for this institution. Your strength, speed, and sensory capabilities are inferior to every other species represented here. Your immune system is primitive. Your lifespan is short. Your brain capacity is limited." Katie waited. "However," the Silithian continued, "your cognitive adaptability scores are unusually high, and the Council has mandated your acceptance. You will be assigned to standard housing and standard classes. You will receive no special accommodations. You will be expected to meet the same standards as every other student." "I understand," Katie said. "I doubt that you do." The Silithian handed her a data pad containing her schedule and room assignment. "Welcome to the academy, human. Try not to die in the first week." Her room was in the oldest part of the campus, far from the other first-year students. It was small and cold, and the furniture had clearly been designed for a species with a very different body shape. Katie spent her first night sleeping on the floor because the bed was impossible to use. Classes began the next morning. Katie arrived early to find that she was the only student in the room. The others trickled in over the next several minutes, each of them taking seats as far from her as possible. When the instructor arrived, a 4-armed Valorian professor named Aldris, he looked at Katie with an expression she could not read. "We have a human among us this year," he announced to the class. "I expect you all to treat her with the same respect you would show any other student. Which is to say, none at all. This is the academy. Respect is earned here, not given." The class laughed. Katie did not. She spent the next several months learning how to survive. Not the lessons that the academy taught in its classrooms, though she studied those harder than anyone else. She learned the real lessons. How to walk through crowded hallways without being knocked down. How to eat in the dining hall without someone stealing her food. How to sleep with one eye open because her door lock had been broken 3 times in the first month. She learned 3 alien languages because the other students refused to speak to her in Standard Galactic. She trained her body to handle the heavy gravity by running every night after classes ended. She practiced combat forms alone in empty rooms because no one would spar with her. And she made one friend. She found him in a maintenance closet on the 47th day of her first semester. He was a broken cleaning drone that someone had thrown away. His processing core was damaged and his mobility systems were failing. He should have been recycled for parts. Katie spent 2 weeks repairing him in secret. She did not know why she bothered. Maybe she just needed something to care about. Maybe she needed something that would not look at her like she was a disease. She named him Buddy. He followed her everywhere after that. A small floating sphere with a single blue eye that blinked when he was happy. He could not speak, but he could listen. And sometimes, late at night, when Katie was too tired to pretend that everything was fine, he would hover close to her and hum softly until she fell asleep. 1 year passed, then another. Katie did not quit. She did not fail. She did not die. And somewhere deep inside her, a fire began to burn. Katie first noticed something was wrong during her 3rd month in the 2nd year. Her meal portions had always been smaller than the other students, but now they were barely enough to keep her standing. When she complained to the dining hall staff, they looked at her with empty eyes and told her that she was receiving the standard human allocation. There was no standard human allocation. She was the only human at the academy. She started keeping records. Every small incident, every strange coincidence. Every time her equipment failed during training or her assignments disappeared from the system before she could submit them. She wrote everything down in a notebook that she kept hidden inside Buddy's maintenance panel. The pattern became clear within 2 weeks. Someone was sabotaging her, not randomly, not carelessly. Someone was systematically trying to make her life impossible. And whoever it was had access to academy systems that should have been beyond the reach of ordinary students. Katie began watching. She sat in the back of every class and observed who looked at her and how. She walked different routes to her room each night and noted who seemed to be following. She paid attention to whispered conversations that stopped when she came near. 3 names kept appearing. Veltrix was a Valorian noble from one of the wealthiest families in the galaxy. His family had donated enough money to build an entire wing of the Academy Library. He walked through the halls like he owned them because, in a way, he did. He had never spoken to Katie directly, but she often caught him watching her with cold silver eyes. Krath Moore was a Kreth warrior whose father sat on the Council of 12. He was enormous even by Kreth standards, with scales the color of dried blood and teeth that he liked to show when he smiled. He had made it very clear during their first combat training session that he could kill Katie with one hand. The instructor had laughed. Silith 9 was a Silithian prodigy who had scored higher on the entrance examinations than any student in 300 years. She rarely spoke, but when she did, every word was calculated for maximum effect. She had once told Katie that humans were an evolutionary mistake that the galaxy would eventually correct. These 3 had nothing in common. They came from different species, different backgrounds, different social circles. But Katie had noticed that they often arrived at the same places at the same times. They exchanged glances that lasted just a moment too long. They moved in patterns that suggested coordination. She needed proof. Buddy was not a sophisticated machine. He was a cleaning drone with limited processing power and even more limited capabilities. But Katie had spent months upgrading him in secret, adding communication arrays and data storage systems that she had salvaged from discarded equipment. He could not fight, he could not speak, but he could listen. She sent him into the ventilation systems above the private meeting rooms that wealthy students used for their secret gatherings. For 3 weeks, Buddy recorded everything he heard. Most of it was useless. Gossip about relationships and complaints about professors and boasting about accomplishments that probably were not real. Then, on the 22nd night, he found them. Katie played the recording in her room with the door locked and the lights off. The voices were slightly distorted by the ventilation shaft, but she could understand every word. "The crucible is in 3 months," Veltrix said. "That is when we move." Finally. Crathmore's voice was like stones grinding together. "I am tired of waiting. Let me just break her neck now and be done with it." "Patience." This was Sylith 9, her translator, giving her voice a flat mechanical quality. "If she dies in an obvious murder, there will be questions. If she dies during the crucible, it will be a tragedy. A reminder of why humans do not belong here. Her drop pod will be programmed to land in the red zone," Veltrix continued. "The area the Academy has marked as extremely hazardous. The predators there have killed Kreth warriors. A human will not last an hour." "And if she survives the landing?" Crathmore asked. "Then we hunt her ourselves. 8 of us, tracking 1 small human through hostile territory. No witnesses, no evidence, just another unfortunate accident during a dangerous examination." "The purists will be pleased," Sylith 9 said. "This will prove once and for all that humans are not fit for galactic society." The recording ended. Katie sat in the darkness for a long time. Her hands were shaking, but she did not notice. Her mind was moving too fast to pay attention to her body. She had 2 choices. She could report the conspiracy to the Academy administrators. She could show them the recording and demand protection. She could try to get Veltrix and Crathmore and Sylith 9 expelled or arrested or punished in some way. But she had reported problems before. Many times. The administrators had ignored every complaint. They had told her that she was being paranoid, that she was not adapting well to Academy culture, that perhaps she should consider returning to human space where she would be more comfortable. Veltrix's family had donated a library wing. Crathmore's father sat on the council. Sylith 9 was the most brilliant student in 3 centuries. Katie was just a human, a primitive, a mistake that the galaxy would eventually correct. No one would help her. No one would believe her. No one would care if she died on Draxis 7. She had one other choice. She could fight. Katie stood up and turned on the lights. She walked to her small desk and sat down. She pulled up every file she could find about the Crucible examination. She studied the rules, the objectives, the terrain of Draxis 7. She read reports from previous years about which students had died and how. Then she started planning. For the next 3 months, Katie Morgan prepared for war. She trained her body harder than she had ever trained before, pushing herself until she collapsed and then getting up to push some more. She studied the biology of every species that would be hunting her, learning their weaknesses and their fears. She learned about the predators of Draxis 7, the acid rain and the carnivorous plants and the temperature swings that could kill an unprepared student in minutes. She memorized the terrain maps and the safe zones and the areas that even the Academy considered too dangerous to enter. She studied trap design, poison extraction, camouflage techniques, survival skills that her instructors had never taught because they assumed no student would ever need them. And she modified her survival kit. She bent the rules in ways that were technically legal, but definitely not intended. She added tools and materials that would give her advantages her enemies would never expect. The night before the Crucible began, Katie stood alone in her room and looked at herself in the mirror. She was still small. She was still weak by galactic standards. She was still one human girl against enemies who wanted her dead. but she was not afraid anymore. She smiled at her reflection. "Come and get me," she whispered. The drop pod hit the surface of Draxus 7 hard enough to rattle Katie's teeth. Warning lights flashed red across every panel. The navigation system screamed errors that she already understood. She was not where she was supposed to be. She had expected this. Katie kicked open the emergency hatch and crawled out into a world that wanted to kill her. The sky was the color of poison, green and yellow and swirling with clouds that promised acid rain. The ground beneath her feet was soft and wet and covered with plants that moved even though there was no wind. The air smelled like sulfur and rot. She checked her position on the handheld scanner. 30 kilometers from the designated landing zone. Deep inside territory that the Academy had marked with red warning symbols. Extremely hazardous. Do not enter. Death likely. Katie smiled and got to work. The first priority was shelter. The acid rain would begin within 6 hours, and she needed to be underground when it started. She studied the landscape around her, looking for rock formations that might contain caves. The scanner showed a promising cluster of hills 2 kilometers north. She started walking. The predators found her within the first hour. They were long and low to the ground, with too many legs and mouths full of teeth that dripped with something that might have been venom or might have been saliva. There were 5 of them, moving through the undergrowth in a pattern that suggested intelligence. Katie did not run. Running would trigger their hunting instincts. Instead, she kept walking at the same steady pace and pulled a small device from her belt. She had built it herself from parts scavenged during her first year at the Academy. It emitted a sound frequency that most species could not hear, but that caused intense pain to creatures with sensitive hearing. The predators scattered. Katie kept walking. The cave system she found was better than she had hoped. It extended deep into the hillside, with multiple chambers and exits that would allow her to escape if something came in after her. The walls were covered with mineral deposits that glowed faintly in the darkness, providing just enough light to see without using her limited power supplies. More importantly, the minerals were toxic to most carbon-based life forms. The predators avoided this place instinctively. They could smell the poison in the air and knew to stay away. Katie's human biology, as it turned out, was resistant to these particular toxins. She had not known this for certain. She had only suspected it based on her research. But the gamble had paid off. She had found her fortress. The next 3 days were spent preparing. Katie explored every tunnel and chamber in the cave system, mapping routes and identifying defensive positions. She gathered materials from the surrounding area, moving quickly during the brief windows when the acid rain stopped and the predators were sleeping. She built traps, many traps. She strung thin fibers across pathways at various heights. She dug pits and covered them with leaves and branches. She collected venom from the local insects and coated sharpened stakes with it. She created deadfall mechanisms using heavy rocks balanced on delicate triggers. She turned the wilderness around her cave into a killing ground, and she waited. They came on the 4th day. Katie heard them before she saw them. Crathmore's voice carried far in the still air, boasting about how quickly he would crush the human when he found her. Veltrix responded in his smooth, aristocratic tone, reminding the Creth that they needed to be careful. Silith 9 said nothing, but Katie could imagine her compound eyes scanning the environment, calculating probabilities. There were 8 of them in total. Veltrix had brought 3 other Valorians, younger nobles who wanted to prove themselves. Crathmore had his 2 largest cousins, warriors who had been bred for combat since birth. Silith 9 came alone, but Katie knew she was the most dangerous of all. They entered her killing ground in a loose formation, spreading out to cover more area. They were confident. They were armed with the best equipment the Academy could provide. They had tracked her signal to this location, and they knew she was nearby. They did not know she was watching them through a crack in the rocks above. The first Valorian triggered a deadfall trap. 300 kilograms of rock dropped onto him from a ledge that Katie had spent hours preparing. The sound of impact was followed by a scream, and then silence. His emergency beacon began transmitting immediately, filling the air with a high-pitched whine that made the others freeze in place. "Trap!" Veltrix hissed. "She has set traps! Spread out and watch your step!" They spread out. This was a mistake. The second and third Valorians found the pits. Katie had dug them deep and lined them with stakes that she had hardened in fire and coated with insect venom. The Valorians fell screaming and did not stop screaming for a long time. The venom was not lethal, but it caused hallucinations and intense pain that would last for weeks. 2 more emergency beacons joined the first. Crathmore roared in fury and charged toward Katie's cave with his cousins close behind. They were massive and fast and utterly confident that nothing on this moon could stop a Creth warrior in full battle rage. They did not see the thin filaments strung across their path until they had already run into them. The fibers were made from a local plant that grew near the acid pools. They were nearly invisible and incredibly strong. Strong enough to cut through Creth scales like wire through soft cheese. 2 of the Creth went down, clutching their throats. They would live, but they would carry the scars forever. Crathmore himself took the wire across his eyes. He fell to the ground screaming, clawing at his face with hands that could have crushed stone. 3 more emergency beacons activated. Katie emerged from her hiding place and walked calmly toward the chaos. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. She had done what she needed to do. 6 of her 8 hunters were down and no longer a threat. Veltrix stood frozen among the fallen bodies of his companions. His silver skin had gone pale, and his 4 hands were shaking. He looked at Katie like she was a monster from a nightmare he could not wake from. "How?" he whispered. "You are just a human." "Yes," Katie said. "I am." She raised a small device and pressed a button. A net fell from the trees above and tangled Veltrix in fibers coated with the same hardening resin she had used on Silith 9's trap. He struggled for a moment and then went still as the resin set. 7 beacons now, 7 of her enemies down. But Silith 9 was nowhere to be seen. Katie turned slowly, scanning the forest around her. The Silithian was too smart to charge blindly into a trap. She would have watched the others fall and calculated a safer approach. She would be somewhere high, somewhere with a clear line of sight, somewhere she could observe and plan. "I know you are watching," Katie called out. "You can come down now. It is over." Silence. Then a voice from above. "Fascinating. Your trap efficiency exceeded my projections by 43%. I underestimated you." Katie looked up. Silith 9 clung to a rock face 20 meters above, her multiple limbs finding holds that no other species could use. Her compound eyes reflected the green sky. "Will you surrender?" Katie asked. "No, but I will remember this. Farewell, human." Silith 9 began to climb away. Katie let her go. She had made her point. The Silithian would carry this memory forever, the knowledge that she had been wrong about humans. That was enough. Katie walked to Crathmore and knelt beside him. He was still conscious, still in agony, still trying to see through eyes that would never work properly again. "You should have left me alone," she said quietly. Then she stood, collected her equipment, and walked toward the extraction point. She still had objectives to complete. She still had a crucible to finish. Behind her, 8 emergency beacons wailed into the poisoned sky. Katie reached the extraction point 12 hours before the deadline. Her boots were worn thin from walking. Her clothes were stained with mud and plant sap, and things she preferred not to identify. But her mission markers were complete, every single one of them, and she was alive. The extraction shuttle landed in a clearing surrounded by dense forest. Katie walked toward it slowly, enjoying the feeling of solid ground beneath her feet. The pilot, a Valorian with tired eyes and a bored expression, looked at her through the cockpit window. His expression changed to confusion when he saw the condition of her equipment and the calm smile on her face. "You are the human," he said through the external speakers. "You survived." "Yes," Katie said. "I did." The flight back to the academy took several hours. Katie spent most of it sleeping in the cargo hold, too exhausted to care about the uncomfortable seats or the suspicious looks from the pilot. When she woke, they were descending through the clouds of Varanus Prime, and the white towers of the academy were rising to meet them. A crowd had gathered at the landing platform. Katie could see administrators in their formal robes, medical teams with stretchers and equipment, and dozens of students watching from a safe distance. She could also see something else in their faces, something she had never seen before when they looked at her: fear. The shuttle doors opened and Katie stepped out into the sunlight. A senior administrator approached her immediately. A Silithian whose compound eyes were blinking rapidly in a pattern that suggested extreme agitation. "Katie Morgan," the administrator said, "you are to come with us immediately. There are questions about the incidents that occurred during the Crucible." "I am sure there are," Katie said. They took her to a room she had never seen before. It was deep inside the administrative building, far from the windows and corridors where students walked. The walls were bare and the chairs were uncomfortable. A single light hung from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows across everything. 3 administrators sat across from her at a long table. They did not offer her water or food or a chance to clean herself after a week in the wilderness. They simply stared at her with expressions that mixed anger and confusion in equal measure. 8 students were critically injured during the Crucible, the lead administrator said. He was a Kreth, smaller than Krathmore but with the same cold yellow eyes. "All of them were injured in the same sector where you were located. All of them are claiming that you attacked them without provocation." Katie nodded slowly. "May I respond?" "You may." "First," Katie said, "I would like to know why my drop pod was programmed to land 30 kilometers from the designated zone, in territory that the Academy has marked as extremely hazardous." The administrators exchanged glances. "That is being investigated," the Kreth said carefully. "Second," Katie continued, "I would like to present evidence that the 8 students who were injured had planned in advance to hunt and kill me during the Crucible. I have recordings of their conversations, including specific details about how they intended to make my death look like an accident." Silence filled the room. Katie reached into her equipment pouch and pulled out a small data chip. "This contains audio recordings made by my personal drone over a period of 3 weeks before the Crucible began. The recordings clearly identify Veltrix, Krathmore, Silith 9, and their 5 accomplices planning what they called a hunting expedition. Their target was me. Their goal was to prove that humans do not belong in galactic society by killing me where no one would witness it." She placed the chip on the table. "I did not attack anyone," Katie said. "I defended myself against 8 armed students who entered my position with the intent to murder me. Every trap I constructed was designed to incapacitate, not kill. All 8 of my attackers survived. I could have ensured otherwise." The administrators looked at the chip like it was a bomb that might explode at any moment. "This recording," the Kreth said slowly. "How do we know it is authentic?" "You can verify it with any standard analysis. My drone has no capability to fabricate audio, and I suspect that if you examine the navigation logs from my drop pod, you will find evidence that someone altered my landing coordinates from an Academy terminal, perhaps a terminal that can be traced to one of the conspirators." More silence. The administrators were no longer looking at Katie. They were looking at each other, and their expressions suggested that they were having a conversation she could not hear. "You may go," the Kreth finally said. "We will review this evidence and contact you with our findings." Katie stood to leave. At the door, she paused and looked back. "I have copies of those recordings," she said, "just so you know." The administrators did not respond. 2 days later, the recordings went viral across the galactic networks. Katie did not release them herself. She did not have to. Someone inside the academy had leaked them, perhaps an administrator who was tired of watching wealthy families buy their children out of consequences. Perhaps someone who had seen what Katie had done and decided that the truth mattered more than politics. Within hours, every major news organization in the known universe was demanding answers. The recordings were clear and damning. 3 elite students from powerful families had conspired to murder a human girl, and the academy had either failed to notice or chosen not to act. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Veltrix's family withdrew him from the academy before he could be formally expelled. His father issued a public apology and resigned from 2 corporate boards. The family's reputation, built over generations of careful diplomacy and strategic donations, collapsed in a matter of days. Crathmore's father, the council member, was forced to recuse himself from all academy-related decisions. Crathmore himself was expelled and banned from returning to Varenus Prime for the rest of his life. His injuries, the doctors said, would heal eventually. His reputation never would. Silith 9 faced no formal punishment. She had not directly participated in the attack, had not triggered any traps, had not been injured. But her dissertation committee quietly dissolved, and her applications to every prestigious research institution were rejected without explanation. The Silithian scientific community did not tolerate those who made their species look foolish. 3 administrators were forced to resign for their failure to address Katie's previous complaints. A full review of academy policies regarding harassment and threats was announced. The Council of 12 issued a formal apology to humanity, the first such apology in the institution's 6,000-year history. And Katie Morgan returned to classes. She walked through the same corridors she had walked through for 2 years. She sat in the same classrooms, ate in the same dining hall, trained in the same facilities. But everything was different now. Students who had ignored her for years now nodded when she passed. Some of them even spoke to her, asking about her classes or commenting on the weather. A few approached her in private, apologizing for things they had done or failed to do. Katie accepted their apologies without comment. She did not need their friendship. She did not need their approval. She had proven something to herself and to the galaxy, and that was enough. But late at night, when she sat alone in her room with Buddy hovering nearby, she allowed herself to feel something she had not felt in a very long time. Hope. 3 years after the Crucible, Katie Morgan stood on a stage in front of 10,000 beings from across the galaxy. She wore the formal robes of an academy graduate, white and gold with symbols of achievement woven into the fabric. Her grades, displayed on the massive screen behind her, placed her at the top of her class. She was the first human to graduate from the Galactic Academy of Varennes. She would not be the last. The Council of 12 sat in the front row, watching her with expressions that she could now read easily after years of practice. Some of them were proud. Some were still skeptical. A few looked at her with something that might have been fear, though they would never admit it. The graduation ceremony lasted for hours. Speeches were made in dozens of languages. Awards were presented to students who had achieved excellence in various fields. When Katie's name was called, the applause was louder than it had been for anyone else. She stepped forward to receive her diploma from the Academy's oldest administrator, a Valorian who had been teaching at the institution for 800 years. His silver skin was pale with age, and his 4 arms moved slowly, but his eyes were sharp and clear. "Congratulations, Katie Morgan," he said in a voice that carried across the entire auditorium. "You have earned this." Katie took the diploma and bowed slightly. "Thank you." She returned to her seat and sat quietly through the rest of the ceremony. Buddy hovered nearby, his single blue eye blinking with what Katie had learned to recognize as happiness. He had been upgraded many times over the years, given better sensors and stronger motors and a more sophisticated processing core. But he was still the same small drone she had found broken and abandoned in a maintenance closet. He was still her friend. After the ceremony, Katie walked through the academy grounds one last time. She visited the places that had been important to her. The empty training room where she had practiced combat forms alone at night. The dining hall where she had eaten in silence while others laughed around her. The small room in the oldest part of campus where she had slept on the floor because the furniture did not fit her body. She also visited the cave on Draxis 7, though that required a special permit and a shuttle flight that cost more credits than she wanted to spend. The traps were gone now, cleaned up by Academy maintenance teams. The minerals still glowed faintly in the darkness. The predators still avoided the area. Katie stood in the chamber where she had waited for her enemies and remembered how afraid she had been. How alone, how certain that she would not survive. She had been wrong about that last part. The years that followed her graduation were busy. Katie had received offers from every major organization in the galaxy, corporations and governments and military commands that wanted to add a human to their ranks. She turned them all down. She had other plans. She became a diplomat. Her first assignment was a minor trade negotiation between two species that had been arguing over shipping routes for decades. She resolved it in 3 weeks. Her second assignment was a territorial dispute that had nearly started a war. She resolved that one too. Her third assignment was a hostage crisis on a remote mining station where 17 beings were being held by armed separatists. She resolved that one in person. The separatists had demanded that no military forces approach the station. They had not said anything about diplomats. Katie docked her shuttle at an auxiliary port and walked into the mining complex alone, carrying nothing but a data pad and her old friend Buddy. The hostages were freed within 6 hours. The separatists surrendered peacefully. When asked how she had convinced them, Katie simply said that she had shown them a different perspective. She never explained what that meant. Over the following decade, Katie Morgan became the most successful human diplomat in galactic history. She negotiated treaties that had been considered impossible. She built bridges between species that had hated each other for millennia. She created a network of relationships and alliances that transformed humanity's position in the galaxy. The Academy created a scholarship program in her honor. The Morgan Foundation, they called it. It was specifically designed to bring more humans to Varenus Prime, to give them the same opportunity that Katie had received when her father died saving strangers. The first class had 12 human students. The second had 30. By the time Katie was 40 years old, humans made up nearly 10% of the Academy's student body. They struggled, as she had struggled. They faced prejudice, as she had faced prejudice. But they also found friends and allies and opportunities that previous generations could never have imagined. They carried her legacy forward. Katie kept track of the beings who had tried to kill her during the Crucible, not out of anger or desire for revenge. She was simply curious about what had become of them. Veltrix had vanished into obscurity. His family's fortune had been divided among creditors and distant relatives. He worked now as a minor administrator on a colony world far from anywhere important. Katie had never spoken to him again. Silith 9 had spent years studying human psychology, trying to understand how she had been so thoroughly outmaneuvered. She eventually published a dissertation titled The Danger of Underestimation that became required reading at the Academy. Katie had read it. The analysis was brilliant, but the conclusions were wrong. Krathmore had changed the most. His injuries had humbled him in ways that nothing else ever had. He spent years in rehabilitation, learning to navigate a world he could no longer see clearly. During that time, he had sent Katie a message asking to meet with her. She had agreed. Their first conversation had been awkward and painful. Crathmore had apologized, not because he was required to, but because he understood now what he had done. He had been raised to believe that strength was everything, that the weak existed to serve the strong. Katie had shown him that strength came in many forms. They became allies eventually. Not friends, perhaps, but something close to it. Crathmore used his family's remaining influence to support Katie's diplomatic initiatives. He spoke at conferences about the dangers of prejudice and the importance of recognizing potential in unexpected places. He never forgot what she had done to him. He never stopped respecting her for it. On the 20th anniversary of her graduation, Katie returned to the academy for a ceremony in her honor. She was 57 years old now. Her hair gray and her face lined with decades of smiles and frowns and everything in between. Buddy still floated beside her, though he had been rebuilt so many times that only his processing core remained from the original. She stood on the same stage where she had received her diploma and looked out at an audience that included hundreds of human students. They watched her with eyes full of admiration and hope and the absolute certainty that they could achieve anything. Katie smiled. "I was told when I first arrived here that humans did not belong," she said. "I was told that we were too weak, too primitive, too limited to contribute to galactic civilization. I was told that our species was a mistake, that the universe would eventually correct." She paused, letting the words settle. "I am here to tell you that they were wrong. Not because humans are stronger than other species, not because we are smarter or faster or better in any measurable way. We are not. By almost every metric that the galaxy uses to judge worth, we fall short." The audience was silent. "But we have something that other species often overlook. We have the ability to endure, to adapt, to keep fighting long after others would have given up. We are not the strongest or the smartest or the fastest, but we are the most stubborn beings in the universe. And that stubbornness has carried us further than anyone ever expected." Katie looked at the human students in the audience, at the future diplomats and scientists and leaders who would carry humanity forward into the next generation. "They trapped me once," she said softly. "The Academy paid the price. And the galaxy learned a lesson that I hope it never forgets." She straightened her shoulders and spoke the final words clearly so that everyone could hear. "Never underestimate a human. We will surprise you every time." The applause lasted for a very long time.